That night, beneath the crystal chandeliers and hollow applause, my son called me a burden in front of the wealthy circle he desperately wanted to join. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, walked away in silence, and took with me a secret large enough to overturn their entire world. 8 years later, when I appeared as the principal investor at the city's most exclusive event, his eyes met mine from his security uniform, and Karma began to speak in the language only silence could teach. My name is Margaret Whitfield Maggie, to those who bothered to know me, and at 61. I'd spent more nights mopping floors than most people spend sleeping. The rehearsal dinner at the Harrington estate in Aspen should have been my proudest moment as a mother. Instead, it became the night I learned that dignity costs nothing, but silence pays everything. The champagne flute felt wrong in my calloused hands. Not because I couldn't appreciate Dom Perignon. I'd cleaned enough executive offices at Northridge Custodial Services to know the difference between real crystal and pressed glass. They'd given me the latter, naturally. A paper napkin instead of linen. A seat so close to the kitchen door that every time it swung open, the smell of truffle reduction mixed with industrial dishwasher steam hit my face like a slap. Mrs. Whitfield. So lovely you could make it. Veronica Harrington glided past my table without stopping. Her voice pitched just loud enough for others to hear her acknowledgement, just distant enough to establish hierarchy. She wore ivory Chanel, I knew, because the tag was still partially visible under her left arm. A deliberate oversight that wealthy women use to authenticate their purchases. Her daughter, Sloane, my future daughter-in-law, trailed behind in rose gold sequins that caught the light like scales on a beautiful, poisonous fish. Lucas stood near the head table, his Tom Ford suit $6,000. I'd seen the receipt he'd accidentally left in his apartment, cutting a sharp silhouette against the mountain view. My son, whom I'd raised on generic cereal and second-hand clothes so he could have college without loans, now wore cufflinks worth more than my monthly salary. He was laughing at something Preston Harrington said, that practiced laugh he'd developed in business school. All teeth and no soul. The room hummed with conversations about ski seasons in Gstaad, charity auctions where people bid $50,000 on wines they'd never drink, the help problem everyone seemed to have with their third homes. I caught fragments as service people who looked like younger versions of me navigated between tables with practiced invisibility. Lucas, darling, you must tell them about the Geneva acquisition. Sloane's voice cut through, theatrical and commanding. She had her hand on his arm, nails the color of dried blood against his sleeve. He began his story, hands moving as he spoke. The MIT ring I'd saved for 2 years to buy him catching the light. I stood to get closer, to catch the moment my son commanded the room. The paper napkin fell from my lap. When I bent to retrieve it, my knee popped too many years kneeling on hard floors, and I had to grab the chair for support. Mother? Lucas's voice found me halfway up, sharp, with something I didn't want to name. The room didn't exactly stop, but it paused, the way traffic slows to observe an accident. I straightened, smiled. Just wanted to hear your story better, sweetheart. His jaw tightened. In the chandelier light baccarat, if I wasn't mistaken. About 40,000 per piece, I watched him calculate the social cost of my proximity. Perhaps you should sit down. You look tired. I'm fine, Lucas, just proud. Please. His hand shot out as I reached for his arm, not quite pushing, but deflecting. The way you'd guide a confused elderly person away from traffic. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The words hit first. Then the laughter, Sloane's tinkling giggle that authorized others to join. But it was the gesture that killed something in me, his hand, wiping where I'd almost touched him, as if poverty were contagious. "She means well," I heard him say to Preston as I turned back to my table. "It's just you understand. Some people don't know how to exist in certain spaces. It's not really her fault. She's been a burden long enough that she doesn't know how to be anything else." Burden. The word lodged between my ribs like shrapnel. I sat back down at my assigned seat. Zone D, Table 12. The mathematics of exclusion spelled out in calligraphy place cards. The kitchen door swung open again. This time, I didn't flinch at the steam. I folded my paper napkin into perfect squares. A habit, from years of making everything last longer, stretch further. The secret in my chest, the one about inherited railroads and storage empires, about municipal bonds and compound interest, about choosing to be poor so he could learn to be rich, sat heavier than the industrial-grade bleach I'd carried up 17 flights when the freight elevator broke. I picked up my glass flute, the cheap one, the safe one, the one they could afford to let me break, and took a sip of champagne that tasted like battery acid and burned like truth. The party continued around me, through me, past me. I'd become what I'd practiced for years in my custodial work, invisible, essential, and completely forgettable. But forgettable people. I'd learned. Make the best record keepers. And I never forgot a debt. The burden started when Lucas was 3, and his father decided that marriage to a night shift janitor wasn't the adventure he'd signed up for. He left on a Tuesday, taking nothing but his guitar and leaving everything that mattered: bills, responsibilities. A confused toddler asking why Daddy's car wasn't in the driveway anymore. I could have crumbled then. Instead, I learned the mathematics of survival, $1 stretched 3 ways, sleep carved from margins, pride swallowed in measured doses like medicine. What Lucas never knew, what I made sure he never knew, was that 6 months after his father left, my own father died, leaving me more than memories of a Union Pacific Railroad engineer who'd worked every holiday for 40 years. The life insurance was substantial, but it was the other thing that changed everything: a 20% stake in High Plains Storage, a chain of self-storage facilities across Colorado that my father had invested in with his railroad buddies back when land was cheap and people still thought digital would eliminate the need for physical space. Turns out, Americans would always have too much stuff and not enough room. I remember sitting in Arthur Bell's office. He was 68 then, a financial advisor who'd handled my father's portfolio with the kind of discretion that's extinct now. His office smelled like pipe tobacco and old leather. Nothing like the glass and chrome spaces where Lucas would later work. "Margaret," he'd said, adjusting his reading glasses. "This is worth approximately $2.3 million now, growing at about 12% annually. What would you like to do?" I looked at the papers, then at 3-year-old Lucas colouring in the corner, tongue out in concentration, using the stub of a crayon I'd fished from a restaurant floor. "Lock it up," I said. "Municipal bonds, ladder strategy, whatever's safe and boring. I want to forget it exists." Arthur's eyebrows rose above his bifocals. "You're going to continue working as a custodial manager?" "Yes. But your son will learn what things cost." I picked up Lucas's crayon when it rolled off the table. "Money inherited is just luck. Money earned is education. I want him educated." So I created a fiction more elaborate than any story Lucas would later tell at business dinners. every month. I deposited my Northridge Custodial Services check, $1,437 after taxes, into our checking account. Every month. I paid our bills from that same account. Visible, traceable, real. The storage facility's quarterly distributions, managed by Arthur and later his son, went into a trust so Byzantine that even I sometimes forgot it existed. Lucas grew up watching me count pennies at grocery stores, clip coupons from Sunday papers, wear the same winter coat for 8 years until the lining disintegrated. He watched me work double shifts to buy his graphing calculator, take extra jobs cleaning medical offices to pay for his SAT prep. When MIT's acceptance letter came, I cried not because I couldn't afford it, but because he'd earned it, thinking I couldn't. "Mum, the loans aren't that bad," he'd said, 17 and earnest, holding the financial aid package. "I can work summers. No loans," I said firmly. "I've been saving." He looked around our 2-bedroom apartment in Aurora water stains on the ceiling, carpet that hadn't been replaced since the 90s, and his face went through a series of calculations I could follow like a map. Confusion, disbelief. Then something worse, pity mixed with shame. "Mum, you can't. This is everything you have. Isn't it your whole retirement? Everything." "It's for you," I said, which was true enough. Everything visible was for him. He hugged me then, crying a little, promising he'd make it worth it, that he'd take care of me someday. I believed him. That was my mistake, not the money, but believing that gratitude aged like wine instead of milk. The years at MIT changed him in increments I measured, but ignored. Freshman year. Some of the kids here, Mum, their parents own companies. Sophomore year. It's not that you're embarrassing, it's just they wouldn't understand your life. Junior year. Maybe skip parents' weekend, it's not really your scene. Senior year. I got the consulting job, $300K to start. I can finally get you out of that life. But I didn't want out. I wanted him to understand that life had been a choice, not a sentence. That every floor I'd mopped had been a lesson I was teaching him about value versus worth. The trust sat in its financial vault, growing like a secret garden. Arthur Bell's son, Arthur Jr., would send quarterly statements to a P.O. box I maintained in Wheat Ridge. 20% of High Plains storage had become worth $8 million, then 12, then 18, as Denver's population exploded and everyone needed somewhere to store their excess. I never touched it. Not when my car died and I took buses for 3 months. Not when my wisdom teeth absconded and I paid in installments. Not even when Lucas started dating Sloane Harrington and began reimagining his history, telling people his mother worked in facilities management, or, when pressed, that I was between opportunities. The money waited like a patient animal, growing stronger in the dark, feeding on compound interest and market growth, while I stayed exactly what I'd chosen to be: invisible, essential, and supposedly poor. Let them all think Margaret Whitfield was just another cleaning lady who'd gotten lucky with a smart son. The truth was more dangerous than any lie they could tell about me. The truth was that I'd chosen every single moment of this. The wedding at the Harrington estate in Aspen was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. on a Saturday in June, when the mountain light would be absolutely divine for photographs, as Veronica had explained to anyone who'd listen. I'd driven up in my 2011 Honda Civic, the one with the rattling air conditioner and a crack across the windshield that had been there so long it felt like part of the design. The call from Veronica came at 11:15 that morning, while I was steaming the dress I'd bought at Ross Navy Blue. $40. The nicest thing in my closet. Margaret, darling, she began, and I knew from darling that something was about to be taken from me. We've had to make some adjustments to the seating arrangements. You understand? Of course, the governor's wife decided to attend last minute. And, well, the optics. Where am I sitting? Veronica. Table 19. You'll have a lovely view of the ceremony from there. Table 19 was in the annex tent. I'd seen the layout when I'd foolishly offered to help with planning months ago, before they'd made it clear my help wasn't the kind they needed. It was where they put vendors who had to be fed, distant relatives who couldn't be excluded, anyone whose presence was more obligation than invitation. And the mother-son dance, I asked, though I already knew. Oh, that. Yes, Lucas and I discussed it, and we thought, given the timing of everything, the flow of the evening, perhaps it's best to skip the formal parent dances. They're so outdated anyway. Don't you think? I hung up while she was still talking. My hand was steady as I put down the phone, steady as I zipped up the $40 dress, steady as I drove 3 hours through mountain passes toward my son's wedding. The estate sprawled across 17 acres of manicured perfection. I counted 3 parking attendants who looked through me before one finally, reluctantly, took my keys. Event staff parks behind the service building, he said. I'm the groom's mother. He looked at his list, then at my Honda, then at me. Table 19. Yes. Follow the gravel path around the main house. The annex tent is past the rose garden. The main ceremony space was a fever dream of white and gold. Peonies the size of dinner plates, imported from Holland. An actual string quartet warming up beside a dance floor installed over the grass. I caught glimpses through the main tent's opening as I walked the service path, Lucas in his tuxedo, laughing with groomsmen who all looked like they'd been pressed from the same Yale, Harvard, Stanford mold. The annex tent smelled like citronella candles trying to mask its second-class status. I found my seat between a wedding photographer's assistant and someone's accountant. We had paper programs instead of the letterpress ones. Our centerpieces were carnations dyed to match, not the garden roses that graced the main tent. During the ceremony, I stood when everyone stood, sat when they sat. I watched my son marry a woman whose family had taught him to be ashamed of me. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I thought about the $18 million sitting in trust, about how easily I could buy this entire estate, this entire family. I held my peace. The reception was choreographed humiliation during cocktail hour. I tried to approach Lucas 3 times. Each time, Sloane materialized with someone important. He simply had to meet right now. When dinner was served, salmon in the main tent, chicken in the annex, I ate alone, while table 19 discussed the weather. Then came the moment that broke everything left between us. The band leader announced the parent dances. Sloane and Preston Harrington swayed to The Way You Look Tonight. Every phone recording, every eye misty. When it ended, the band leader looked at his card, confused, then simply moved on to the next song. No mention of a mother-son dance. Lucas didn't even glance toward the annex tent. But Veronica wasn't done. During the toast portion, she stood with her champagne, real champagne, not the Prosecco they'd served in the annex, and smiled that practiced smile. Before we continue celebrating, there's been a small security matter. Nothing serious, but apparently some valuable jewelry has gone missing from the bridal suite. Now, I'm sure it's just misplaced, but if everyone could just check their things. When had security guards arrived, began moving through the crowd. They started, naturally, at the annex tent. When they reached me, Veronica herself appeared. "Margaret, I'm so sorry about this, but would you mind, just to eliminate any confusion?" The guard was young, embarrassed. I handed him my purse, fake leather, bought at Target 6 years ago. He went through it like he was defusing a bomb. My wallet with $17 cash, a tin of Altoids, tissues, my Honda key, a photo of Lucas from high school. "Check the lining," Veronica suggested sweetly. "Sometimes things fall through tears." There were no tears. There was nothing hidden. There was just me, standing in an annex tent while 200 guests pretended not to watch the groom's mother being searched like a shoplifter. "All clear," the guard mumbled. "Oh, good," Veronica said loudly. I was certain it was just a misunderstanding. The sapphire earrings were found an hour later in Sloane's makeup bag. No announcement was made about that. I left during the father-daughter dance. No goodbye to Lucas, he was busy laughing at another Preston Harrington story. No word to Veronica, she'd already forgotten I existed once the humiliation was complete. I just walked back down the gravel path to my Honda, which someone had moved even further back, and drove 3 hours home through the dark mountains. In my apartment that night, I sat at my kitchen table with the quarterly statement from High Plains Storage. 22 million now. Enough to buy their respectability 10 times over. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Lucas's number, and deleted it. Then I called Arthur Bell Jr. "I want to liquidate one of the smaller facilities," I said, "and I need you to help me disappear. Margaret is everything. Everything's about to be exactly what it should have been all along. Scottsdale in August feels like standing inside a hairdryer, but I needed that heat to burn away who I'd been." The first thing I did after arriving was cut my hair at a salon that cost more than I'd ever spent on groceries in a month. The stylist, a woman named Carmela with perfect eyebrows, asked what I wanted. "Make me look like money," I said. She did. The grey I'd hidden with box dye became silver deliberately placed. The shapeless length became an architectural bob that moved like water. When she turned me toward the mirror, I saw someone I'd kept locked in storage for decades. I rented a condo in North Scottsdale, all glass and stone and views of Pinnacle Peak. The first month, I hired a personal trainer named Derek who didn't care about my past, only about my form during deadlifts. A therapist named Dr. Reeves, who specialized in life transitions for mature women. A nutritionist. A stylist. I was building myself like Lucas had built his resume strategically, deliberately, without sentiment. The liquidation of the Thornton storage facility gave me $3.7 million in cash. Arthur Jr. handled it through a shell company, clean and invisible. I put $2 million into immediate investments, kept the rest liquid for what came next. What came next was Jason Carver. I met him at a hotel bar in Paradise Valley, where I'd been going to study how wealthy people moved through space, their posture, their pauses, the way they signed checks without looking at the total. He was fighting with someone on the phone, his voice controlled, but his knuckles white around a glass of scotch. "I don't care if the Venetian ballroom is booked. Find another venue or find another job." He hung up, saw me watching, and had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sorry, that was unprofessional." "Venue problems?" I asked. "Event planning crisis. My company manages luxury experiences, and my operations manager just quit via text message during peak season." He signaled the bartender for another drink, then looked at me more carefully. "You're not in the industry, are you? You have that look like you understand logistics." I thought about 23 years of coordinating night crews, managing supply chains for industrial cleaning, memorizing the rhythm of 1,000 different buildings. I understand systems. We talked for 3 hours. Marrow and Vale Experiences, his company, was hemorrhaging money despite full bookings. He had the connections, the vision, but couldn't manage the details. By 11:45 p.m., I'd diagnosed 4 operational failures just from his complaints. By midnight, I'd decided to buy in. "I need a partner," he said finally, desperate enough to proposition a stranger. "Someone with capital and sense." "How much capital?" 500,000 would keep us afloat. 1 million would let us expand. I wrote a check for 1.5 million the next morning. The contract gave me 40% ownership and full operational control. Jason thought he was getting a rich retiree looking for a project. He got something much more dangerous. I spent 6 months learning the industry from inside its belly. Every vendor, every venue, every delicate negotiation that separated the exceptional from the adequate. I learned that flowers had their own language. Peonies meant new money. Orchids meant tech money. Roses meant old money trying to seem relevant. I learned that lighting could make a $200 dress look like couture or make a $20,000 dress look like trash. I learned that the difference between a good event and a legendary one was anticipating what rich people wanted before they knew they wanted it. The company's revival was surgical. I fired the lazy, promoted the hungry, and implemented systems that ran like Swiss watches. I made Jason the face while I became the spine. Within a year, we weren't just surviving, we were turning away clients. "You're some kind of genius," Jason said after we landed the Phoenix Art Museum gala, a contract worth 2.3 million. "Where did you learn all this?" "Night school," I said. And it wasn't really a lie. Every night for 23 years, I'd studied how buildings worked, how people moved, how to be invisible while keeping everything running. I changed my last name legally, but kept Margaret. Margaret Vale looked good on business cards, felt right on contracts. I bought a Range Rover, not because I needed it, but because it was expected. I joined the right gyms, the right clubs, attended the right charity lunches where women complained about problems that would have been my dreams 5 years ago. The transformation wasn't just external. I learned to move differently, slower, more deliberate, as if time itself waited for me. I learned to speak in the passive voice that rich people use to distance themselves from their demands. It would be wonderful if, instead of, "I want," I learned to smile with my eyes closed slightly, as if everything amused me, but nothing surprised me. Sometimes, late at night in my Scottsdale condo, I'd catch my reflection and see a stranger. The woman in the glass wore silk pajamas, had regular facials, kept fresh flowers in every room. She looked nothing like the woman who'd raised Lucas on generic cereal and coupon dinners. But when I looked at my hands still scarred from industrial cleaners, still strong from carrying buckets up flights of stairs, I knew exactly who I was. I was Margaret Whitfield, who'd chosen poverty to teach a lesson. Now I was Margaret Vale, who'd chosen wealth to deliver one. Jason never asked about my past, and I never offered. In Scottsdale, reinvention was a civic virtue. Everyone was running from something or towards something, and the only sin was looking back. But I wasn't running. I was building. Every contact, every contract, every perfectly executed event was a brick in a wall I was constructing between who I'd been and who I was becoming, not to hide, but to rise above. 2 years in, Marrow and Vale had become simply Vale and Associates after I bought Jason out for 3 times his initial investment. He thanked me as he signed the papers, grateful to escape with profit. "You sure you want to rebrand?" he asked. "Marrow and Vale has recognition now. The right people will recognize quality regardless of the name," I said. The right people. I was becoming one of them, or at least wearing their costumes so perfectly that even I sometimes forgot it was a disguise. By year 4, Vale and Associates had become Whitfield and Vale. I'd reclaimed my name like recovering stolen property. We operated out of a glass office in Denver's Cherry Creek district, with satellite operations in Aspen and Scottsdale. 22 employees who called me Ms. Whitfield, not knowing it had once been preceded by just the cleaning lady. The formula for infiltrating high society was simpler than anyone imagined: deliver perfection, never gossip, and make rich people feel like visionaries for choosing you. Every detail was a message. The waiting area had first editions of Architectural Digest, not current issues implying we were too busy creating tomorrow's features to read today's. Our proposals arrived in custom leather portfolios that clients kept as souvenirs. We sent handwritten thank you notes on paper that cost $40 a sheet. I studied the social mathematics of Denver's elite like preparing for war. The Harringtons sat on 3 boards, donated to 7 charities, and attended 19 major events annually. Lucas had joined 2 country clubs, was being groomed for partnership at McKenna Stratton Consulting, and lived in a Highlands ranch house that Instagram loved but had no soul. Sloane had started a lifestyle blog about mindful luxury that got mentioned in 5280 magazine. The intelligence came through my network: florists, caterers, valet captains, the invisible army that knew everything because rich people forgot we had ears. Lucas's marriage was pristine in public, strained in private. Sloane spent more time in Los Angeles than Denver. Veronica had quietly sold her stake in 2 ventures to cover what she called temporary liquidity issues. The Harringtons are downsizing their Aspen property. My venue coordinator mentioned during a Tuesday morning meeting, moving to something more intimate. Financial trouble. I asked, though I already knew. High Plains Storage. My remaining 60% had received an inquiry about large unit rentals from Harrington Holdings. They needed space for furniture from the house they couldn't afford to keep. "Appearances to maintain," she said. Everything in this world was about appearances. Seating charts were politics, flowers were statements, lighting was language. I became fluent in all of it. At the governor's ball, I was placed at table 3 inner circle adjacent. At the Denver Art Museum Gala, committee members asked my opinion about patron experience design. At charity auctions, I bid precisely enough to be noticed, not enough to seem desperate for attention. The whispers about Vale and Associates evolved into recognition, then respect, then something approaching reverence. We didn't just plan events. We created social moments that defined seasons. The Broadmoor anniversary celebration that made the Times Style section, the Children's Hospital Gala that raised $7 million in one night, the private concert at Red Rocks that became mythology. But I never forgot that every champagne flute I selected, every orchid I approved, every seating arrangement I crafted was building toward a single moment, like compound interest. My reputation accumulated invisibly, steadily, inevitably. One afternoon, reviewing contracts in my office, my assistant knocked. "Ms. Whitfield." There's a woman here about the Summit Hearts Foundation Gala, Veronica Harrington. I let her wait 17 minutes. Not childish revenge strategic positioning. When powerful people wait, they either leave in anger or stay in submission. She stayed. Veronica entered my office smaller than I remembered. Though her Botox hadn't allowed her face to age, she wore Chanel again, but last season's, and her handbag, her mess, naturally had subtle signs of wear that suggested she couldn't replace it casually anymore. "Margaret," she began, then caught herself. "Ms. Whitfield. I'm here about the Summit Hearts Gala." "Ms. Vale," I corrected. "Whitfield and Vale is the company. I go by Vale professionally." Her confusion lasted half a second before she recovered. Of course, she didn't recognize me. The woman she'd humiliated had worn $40 dresses and drove a broken Honda. The woman behind this desk wore Armani, had Julia Roberts' hairstylist, and commanded fees that made society matrons flinch. "We need someone exceptional," she said, the words costing her. "The foundation's reputation depends on this event. My firm's minimum is $500,000 for galas of this caliber," I said. "Plus 20% of sponsorship procurement." She swallowed. "That's substantial." Quality always is. Mediocrity, on the other hand, is surprisingly expensive in the long run. She needed me. More importantly, she needed to be seen as someone who could still afford me. The social mathematics worked in my favor. Hiring Whitfield and Vale would signal that the Harringtons were still players, not the walking wounded everyone suspected they'd become. "I'll need to discuss with the board," she said. Of course. Though I should mention we're nearly booked through next year. Decisions delayed often become opportunities missed. She signed the preliminary contract that afternoon. I assigned my best team to the Summit Hearts Gala, not out of kindness, but precision. This needed to be flawless, the kind of event that redefined what Denver society thought possible. I selected the Braxton Ridge estate, negotiated sponsorships from companies that rarely sponsored anything, convinced the governor's wife to co-chair. During planning meetings, I watched Veronica struggle to remember where she knew my voice from, saw her almost recognition when I laughed, noticed her relief when she dismissed the feeling. The poor were invisible to her even in memory. 3 months before the gala, Lucas's name appeared on a vendor list McKenna Stratton was providing pro bono consulting for the foundation. I circled it in red, then made a call to our security contractor. "For an event of this size, you'll need additional coverage," I told them. "Temporary staff is fine for perimeter work." The pieces were moving into position like a chess match I'd been playing for 6 years. Every decision, every contact, every carefully cultivated relationship had led to this board. At the final planning meeting, Veronica actually smiled at me. "Ms. Vale, you've exceeded every expectation. This will be the event of the season." "It will be memorable," I agreed. She had no idea how memorable. The woman she'd tried to search like a thief. The mother she'd helped estrange from her son. The person she'd relegated to annex tents and paper napkins, that woman had just designed the stage for her own resurrection. I signed my name on the final contracts, Margaret Vale, CEO, and thought about Lucas, about whether he'd recognize his mother when she stood in the spotlight his new family had taught him she never deserved. The answer didn't matter. Recognition was no longer the point. The point was that karma had a name, and it was about to introduce itself properly. The night of the Summit Hearts Gala arrived wrapped in perfect Denver weather, 68 degrees, clear skies, the mountains etched against sunset like a postcard selling dreams. The Braxton Ridge estate glowed from half a mile away, every tree wrapped in lights I'd personally selected for their specific wavelength of warmth. Rich people noticed these things without knowing they noticed them. I arrived at 3 p.m. for final inspections, wearing work clothes, deliberate strategy. Let the staff see me as one of them first, royalty later. The transformation would be part of the performance. Champagne stations every 30 feet, I told my beverage director. No guest should have to look for a drink. The moment of want should meet the moment of provision. The ballroom had been converted into a jewelry box of amber and gold. Edison bulbs, strung at varying heights, created intimacy in vastness. The auction items a week in a Bordeaux chateau, a Tesla, a Basquiat sketch were lit like museum pieces. The stage, where I would eventually stand, was positioned so the Denver skyline would frame anyone speaking. At 5:45 p.m. I changed in the suite I'd reserved. The dress was Saint Laurent, black, architectural, $4,000 of understatement. The shoes were Louboutin, but vintage, suggesting wealth so established it didn't need newness. The jewelry was minimal diamond studs, a single strand of Tahitian pearls. My father's railroad watch converted to a bracelet. By 6:30 p.m., guests were arriving in choreographed waves. I stayed in the operations center, watching through security monitors as my design came alive. The mayor's wife, admiring the orchid installation. Tech billionaires gravitating toward the innovation lounge. Old money clustering near the main bar, where I'd placed the 18-year scotch. Veronica Harrington arrived at 7:15 p.m. wearing new Valentino she'd borrowed against something to afford it. Lucas wasn't with her. Sloan was in Los Angeles, according to Instagram, but his name was on the security roster for McKenna Stratton's table. Ms. Vale. My assistant appeared. The foundation president wants to thank you personally during the program. What time? 8:45 p.m., right before the main auction. Perfect. I watched the crowd swell to 200, then 250. The temporary security staff arrived at 7:45 p.m., dressed in black suits that almost matched the professional team. One of them, assigned to the garden entrance, was 6'2", broad shoulders, moved like someone who'd learned to make himself smaller. Lucas. I watched him on monitor 3, saw the moment he realized where he was, what this meant. McKenna Stratton hadn't just cut staff, they'd eliminated his entire division. The consulting table would sit empty tonight while he worked the door. At 8:30 p.m., I made my entrance. The crowd parted without knowing why money recognizes money, even when it doesn't understand the source. I moved through greetings, air kisses, compliments that cost nothing, and bought everything. The Denver Post photographer asked for a photo. The Chronicle's society reporter wanted a quote. I gave them what they needed to make me tomorrow's news. Ms. Vale, you've outdone yourself, someone said. Wait until you see the finale, I replied. 8:45 p.m. arrived with military precision. The foundation president, a banking heiress named Patricia Coldwell, took the stage. Her voice carried the authority of 5 generations of Colorado wealth. Before our main auction, I need to recognize someone extraordinary. This gala exists because one woman understood that charity isn't about writing checks, it's about creating experiences that change us. She's personally underwritten tonight's infrastructure and donated $100,000 to our cause. Margaret Vale, Please join us. The spotlight found me instantly. I'd programmed it myself. I walked to the stage through applause that sounded like rain on a tin roof, hollow but necessary. The microphone was warm from Patricia's hand. "Thank you," I said, my voice filling the space exactly as I'd tested earlier. Generosity isn't measured in dollars, but in impact. Tonight, you have the opportunity to change lives. I'm simply grateful to facilitate that chance. I started to leave the stage, then paused, unscripted but inevitable. I should mention that none of this would be possible without our security team keeping us safe tonight. Even our temporary staff deserves recognition. The spotlight operator, following my earlier instructions to track me wherever I moved, swung toward the garden entrance. For 3 seconds, Lucas stood illuminated in that unforgiving light, his rented uniform, his temporary badge, his mother standing on the stage he'd once thought she'd never deserve to approach. Our eyes met across the ballroom. I saw the progression of recognition, confusion, disbelief, understanding, then something that looked like fear. I smiled the same smile I'd given him at that rehearsal dinner, the one that said I understood exactly what was happening. The spotlight swung back to me. I finished my exit, returned to my table 1, naturally, and watched the auction begin. Paddles rose like surrender flags. Money moved between accounts, between causes, between people who'd never know what it was like to choose between electricity and groceries. Lucas remained at his post. Professional. I'd give him that. His spine stayed straight, even as his world tilted. When a guest approached the garden entrance, he opened the door with the same precision he'd once used to distance himself from me. At 10:30 p.m. During the dancing, Veronica found me. Her face had the careful composition of someone processing impossibility. "You're Margaret Whitfield," she said. "Not a question." "I've always been Margaret Whitfield. You just never saw me?" She looked toward the garden entrance, where Lucas stood in shadow. "Does he know?" "He knows what he chose to know, just as you did." "This is about revenge." "This is about truth," I corrected. "Revenge would have been destroying you. Truth is letting you see what you destroyed in yourself." The party continued around us, laughter, music, the clink of glasses worth more than what I used to make in a month. But between Veronica and me, silence stretched like a tightrope. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Nothing from you? Not anymore?" I left her standing there and made my rounds, thank you to the staff. Congratulations to the committee. Photographs with donors who'd remember this night as their generosity, not my orchestration. At 11:45 p.m., I signaled my team to begin breakdown. The night was ending, but the reverberations would last. Before leaving, I walked past the garden entrance one more time. Lucas stood at attention, eyes forward, pretending not to see me. I stopped directly in front of him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice professional, empty, perfect. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the loudest sound in the world. Then I walked through the door he held open, into the Colorado night, where my Range Rover waited to take me back to a life I'd built from the ashes of the one he'd burned. Behind me, the Summit Hearts Gala continued its countdown to midnight, to Monday, to the moment when everyone would talk about Margaret Vale's triumph and Lucas Whitfield's inexplicable presence in a uniform meant for people society had agreed not to see. The valet brought my car. I tipped him $200 because I could. Because he reminded me of myself. because kindness to the invisible was a language Lucas had forgotten how to speak. As I drove away, I saw him in my rearview mirror, still standing at his post, guarding an entrance to a world that now knew exactly who his mother was and what he'd thrown away. The backstage area of the Braxton Ridge estate had been designed for privacy, sound-dampened walls, a separate entrance, rooms where deals were made and broken away from public view. I was checking final receipts when Veronica appeared in the doorway, her Valentino slightly wilted from 5 hours of maintaining appearances. "We need to talk," she said. "No, we don't." "Margaret, please." The word cost her everything. Veronica Harrington didn't say please, she implied it through net worth. I set down my tablet, gave her my full attention, a gift worth more than she knew. 5 minutes? She closed the door behind her, moved to the window overlooking the garden where Lucas still stood at his post. "You planned all of this." "I planned a successful gala that raised $6.7 million for children's health care. Your presence was incidental." "Don't." Her voice cracked like good china hitting marble. "I know what I did to you. At the wedding. You searched me like a shoplifter. You suggested I was a thief in front of 200 guests. The earrings were in Sloane's makeup bag. You told me that yourself. 2 hours later, like it was amusing." She turned from the window. In the LED lights I'd specifically chosen for their unforgiving clarity, every line her Botox couldn't prevent showed like a roadmap of bad decisions. They were never lost. The admission hung between us like a body from a noose. "I know," I said simply. "The Cartier sapphires your mother gave you. You planted them in Sloane's bag before the ceremony, retrieved them during cocktails, then put them back after the search. The makeup artist saw you," she told me years later, after 3 glasses of wine at an industry event. "How long have you known?" 4 years, 3 months, 16 days. Veronica sank into one of the velvet chairs I'd selected for their psychological effect, low enough to make people feel vulnerable, soft enough to seem comforting. "It was Sloane's idea. She thought Lucas was pulling away from her, talking about you too much, wanting to include you in things. She needed him to see you as what I was. Poor. As dangerous to the life he'd built." I laughed, not bitter, just acknowledging the sword that had cut both ways. And it worked. He never called me again. He tried, once, 3 months after the wedding. Sloane deleted your number from his phone, told him you'd changed it. This was new information, but I filed it away like a receipt for a purchase I'd already returned. "It doesn't matter, doesn't it?" She leaned forward. "You turned yourself into this." She gestured at me, at the empire I'd built from spite and storage units. To hurt him, to hurt us. "I turned myself into this because I was always this. You just couldn't see it through your prejudice." I stood, smoothing my Saint Laurent with hands that had once been raw from bleach. "Do you want to know the real irony, Veronica?" She waited. "I have $38 million, not implied wealth, not leveraged assets, actual money. I could have saved your husband's company 3 times over. I could have bought Lucas a consulting firm to run. I could have made Sloane's lifestyle blog into an actual business instead of a vanity project funded by diminishing trust funds. Then why? Because you taught them I was worthless, and they believed you. Because Lucas stood in your foyer that night and called me a burden. Because being poor was the only crime that mattered in your world, and you convicted me without trial. If I apologized, your apologies are worth less than your municipal bonds, and those mature in 3 years at a loss. She flinched. She hadn't known I knew about those too. What happens now? She asked. You'll destroy us. You've already destroyed yourselves. Preston's leveraged against assets he doesn't own anymore. You're selling family jewelry to maintain memberships at clubs you can't afford. Sloane's spending Lucas's severance package in Los Angeles, pretending to network while she's actually interviewing for her next husband. Lucas is working security because it's the only job that would take him after McKenna Stratton marked him as a liability. You did that. You got him fired. McKenna Stratton fired him because he missed 3 client meetings while dealing with Sloane's credit fraud. Yes, I know about that too. The advantage of being invisible for 23 years is that other invisible people trust you with their information. Veronica stood, tried to reclaim some dignity. So this is revenge. This is consequence. Revenge would require me to care enough to act. I simply stopped preventing your falls. He's still your son. He was my son. Now he's your creation, a man who measures worth in net worth, who sees poverty as contagion, who chose your approval over his mother's love. You can keep him. She moved toward the door, then paused. The security company. If I told them who you are. Tell them. Tell everyone. Let Denver society know that Margaret Vale is Margaret Whitfield, the janitor who built an empire. Let them know that the woman they begged to plan their daughters' weddings used to clean their toilets. See how that works out for your social standing. She understood then. Finally. Completely. I hadn't just infiltrated her world, I'd conquered it. Every person who mattered would choose me over her, because I could give them what she only pretended to offer actual class. One thing, I said as she opened the door. Lucas doesn't hear about this conversation. Not from you, not from Sloane, not through your gossip network. If he learns who I am, it's on my terms, in my time. Why would I agree to that? Because Summit Hearts needs another gala next year, and Whitfield and Vale is the only firm that can deliver at this level. Because your husband needs investors, and my recommendation carries weight. Because Sloane's father's medical practice needs events planned, and I control that market. Because you may hate me, Veronica, but you need me more than you've ever needed anyone. She left without agreeing, but we both knew she would comply. Power wasn't about what you could take. It was about what others couldn't afford to lose. I returned to my receipts, calculating the night's success in numbers that had nothing to do with money. Outside, Lucas continued his shift, unaware that his mother and his mother-in-law had just negotiated his ignorance like a commodity. At 1:15 a.m., I texted my security manager, the temporary at the garden entrance performed excellently. Please pay him the senior rate and offer him regular shifts if he wants them. It wasn't kindness. It was precision. Every dollar he earned from my company would carry the weight of what he'd lost, even if he didn't know it yet. The truth would find him eventually. Truth always did. But tonight, I controlled that truth like I controlled the lights, the temperature, the music, the very air of the world he'd banished me from. Power. Real power. Wasn't loud. It was standing in a soundproof room, holding someone's entire future, and choosing to whisper. The rose garden at Braxton Ridge was lit by motion sensors I'd specifically chosen. They'd illuminate anyone approaching, but leave them in darkness once still. At 2:23 a.m., after the last vendor had packed, the final invoice signed, I walked through it one last time. Lucas was waiting by the heritage roses, still in his security uniform. the jacket now unbuttoned like armor he no longer needed to wear. "Hello? Mum?" The word hit me like cold water, unexpected after 8 years of silence. I stopped 10 feet away, close enough to see his face, far enough to run. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Since you walked on stage? Your voice, I heard it in my dreams for years. Guilty dreams." He laughed, bitter as burnt coffee. "Margaret Vale? You kept your first name. Did you want me to find you?" "I wanted to remain myself. You're the one who decided Margaret Whitfield wasn't worth knowing." He moved closer. The motion sensor flared, casting shadows that made him look older, younger, like the boy who'd once brought me dandelions he'd called roses. "I'm sorry." "No. Please." "No. You're sorry now. When you're wearing a rented uniform at an event I created. You're sorry when your wife is in Los Angeles spending money you don't have. You're sorry when the life you traded me for is bankrupt." I stepped back, keeping distance between us like evidence in a crime scene. "Were you sorry when you wiped your hand after I touched you? When you called me a burden? When you sat at the main table while I was hidden in the annex tent?" I was young. You were 28, old enough for an MBA, old enough to marry for money, old enough to know exactly what you were doing. He pulled out his phone, showed me a screen, my old number, still saved under Mom. "I tried to call. After the wedding. Sloane said you'd changed numbers, moved, wanted nothing to do with me." "And you believed her? Because it was easier than fighting for me?" "Yes." The admission came clean. No excuses. I believed her because I wanted to. Because loving you complicated the story I was telling about myself. And what story was that? That I'd earned everything. That I was special. That I deserved to be in those rooms, at those tables, with those people. He gestured at the estate around us. "Do you know what it's like to achieve everything you wanted and realize it's worthless? I know what it's like to sacrifice everything for someone who'd trade you for approval from strangers." "I know about the storage facilities," he said suddenly. "Arthur Bell's son contacted me after you disappeared. Wanted to know if I knew where you were. He mentioned High Plains storage. I looked it up. Did the math. And I understood. You could have given me everything. But you gave me nothing, so I'd learn to earn it. Except I learned the wrong lesson. I learned to be ashamed of you instead of proud. You learned exactly what the world taught you. That money mattered more than mother." "What happens now?" He looked exhausted, older than 36, worn down by choices that had seemed like elevations. Could we try again? Try what you want a mother now that you know she's rich, now that she can introduce you to people who matter. "I want my mother because she's my mother." "No. You want absolution. You want me to say it's okay, that I understand, that youth and pressure and Sloane excuse what you did. But I won't lie to make you comfortable. That's what got us here, me pretending poverty was real to teach you lessons. You pretending I didn't exist to earn approval." "Then why did you hire me tonight? Why let me see all this?" "I didn't hire you. You're a random temporary worker assigned by a security company. If you're here, it's because you needed the money, not because I needed you to see anything. But the spotlight follows me wherever I go. You were just standing in its path." He reached out as if to touch me, then remembered another reaching, another rejection, and let his hand fall. "I have a daughter, 7 months old. Sloane doesn't know I know she had her in Los Angeles. thinking she could use her as leverage for divorce. But I know. Her name is Margaret. The night air suddenly felt thick, hard to breathe. Don't. She has your eyes. That specific shade of green that looks grey in certain light. Sloane hates it. Says it makes her look common. Stop. I want her to know you. The real you. Not the story I told, or the one Sloane would tell. I want her to know that her grandmother is the strongest person I've ever met. That she chose to be invisible so I could be seen. And I was too stupid to see her in return. You want redemption through a baby. That's not how this works. I want my daughter to learn what you tried to teach me, that worth isn't wealth, that character isn't credit, that the only real inheritance is integrity. And I can't teach her that. I broke all those things. But you could. No. Mom, don't call me that. You lost that right at table 19? I turned to leave, but he spoke once more. I work security now, not because I have to. McKenna Stratton would take me back. I work it because I need to remember what it feels like to be invisible, to be ignored, to be the person everyone looks through. I'm trying to learn what you knew all along. And what's that? That the view from the bottom shows you who people really are, and who you really are. I looked back once. He stood in the rose garden, my garden, designed with my money, hosting my triumph in his rented uniform with his temporary badge, finally understanding the weight of temporary things. Your daughter, I said. Margaret. When she's old enough to ask about me, tell her the truth. All of it. The floors I mopped, the toilets I cleaned, the son I lost to his own ambition. Tell her that her grandmother loved her father so much she became invisible to teach him visibility, and he loved status so much he made her disappear completely. Tell her that love isn't always enough, but silence is everything. I walked through the garden exit, past the valet station, to my Range Rover parked exactly where I'd designated first spot, closest to the door, marked with a brass placard, reserved for M. Vale. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Not at Lucas standing in the dark garden, not at the estate blazing with my success, not at the son who'd finally recognized his mother only after she'd become someone else entirely. The road down from Braxton Ridge curved through sleeping Denver, past dark houses full of people who'd wake tomorrow to talk about the gala, about Margaret Vale's vision, about the mysterious woman who'd transformed charity into art. None of them would know that Margaret Vale was just Margaret Whitfield, with better shoes and bitter wisdom. None of them would know that revenge, real revenge, wasn't destruction. It was indifference delivered with perfect timing. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I love you. Mom. I deleted it at the next red light, then drove home to my glass-walled condo where no ghosts waited, where no son had ever disappointed me, where Margaret Vale lived alone with her $38 million and the absolute certainty that some bridges, once burned, provided better light than warmth. The end. Thank you for listening to this story of revenge, redemption refused, and the price of choosing pride over love. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts on Margaret's choice. Would you have forgiven Lucas? Or was her silence the ultimate power move?